So let's paint a picture here. You're getting a little bit older now. You may be in your mid-30s. You think with age would come just a touch of responsibility, maybe even a little maturity, but yet here you are. You're not 16 anymore. You can complete a project, right? Well, as it turns out, you still have those projects. The same shit, it just takes a different form. And being the financially responsible human being that you are, you find yourself on Fleabay. Instead of addressing the honey to-do list, you're looking for the next deal. And in hopes that you're going to bypass those evil machine shops, you might even come across something that seems too good to be true. And while you're not going to realize this in the moment, if the deal does seem a little too good to be true, it's probably because it is. And I'm sure if you search long and hard enough, you're going to find a deal, because the reality is you might go, hey, that seems okay, everything looks pretty decent, everything seems kosher. And if you keep looking, you're going to save yourself just a touch more money. I mean, that's $1,000 saving. What's a girl to do? And if you look long and hard enough, things might start getting a touch more sketchy. Maybe the parts might be a little bit more cooked than the last. Now look, I'm not trying to discourage you guys from saving a little bit of money and, shopping around. That's all fine and dandy. All I'm going to say is, especially when it comes to engine parts, I seriously encourage you to take the time and do just a little bit of research and make sure you're at least buying something from a reputable seller. Thankfully, at least in most cases, you've got a little bit of protection buying from Fleabay. And I'm going to show you two more heads, each of them becoming just a touch more extreme when it comes to the basket caseness. So here I've got a Porsche 944 S2 cylinder head. So this is the 16 valve version of the 8 valve 2.5 liter engine that came out of the 944 and 924S starting in '83. Maybe even 82 would be a first example for this. This came out in '87, I believe, and this would be an increase in displacement, so it would be a 3 liter instead of a 2.5 liter. And these things are kind of rare, but they do drive nice. The 944s are still horrible cars, and they have no inherent value, though I have seen what was a $500 car 10, 15 years ago. Apparently $5,000 is the new 500, but inflation and whatnot, we're not going to talk about that. But this came from not eBay, it came from some rando online, possibly on those things that we used to spend so much time on called internet forums. Clearly, being a parts hoarder doesn't qualify you as an international shipper. So I'll run down the list of things that happened here. First, this thing was just thrown loosely in a box. One layer of cardboard and some pieces of paper towel and plastic. They're not going to survive a cross-Atlantic trip. And things just get worse from there. We're missing 13 camcap bolts. Don't quote me on that. Math is a little bit hard these days. But what that meant was these cams were just kind of sitting here putting lateral tension on all the cam caps, and that was also further accentuated by the fact that the cam caps were also not tight. They were just sitting there bouncing around up and down like that, causing all kinds of crazy damage, and I'll show you the worst of it, but these things took a serious hit, I gotta say. So I'll get these, at least one side worth of cam bolts put onto this camshaft. I'm gonna show you this cam got bent in shipping. And that's no good, especially since these things are kind of inherently valuable. Since, and the reason for that is they have failures in this cam-to-cam timing sprocket situation. Now what happens with these sprockets is that these teeth, they like to break off or they get worn off. These are a little bit worn, but they're serviceable. But the lucky thing is that none of them got broken. So whoop-de-doo there, but we still have to drop these off at the cam shop and have dude go and straighten them. So I just tied in the exhaust side worth of camshafts. I do have these cams flip-flopped. It just happened that way because I was doing an inspection on this thing as soon as it showed up. So I did see that half of the head was hanging out of the box, and I could see the cam cap saying hello to me from the outside. It's kind of like when you go and meet your significant other after they got put in jail, and you put your hands up to the window, and it's all cute and movie-like. But this is how I knew the cam was bent. So it's nice and tight here, okay? And I'm gonna try not to bust my knuckles, but as soon as I get 180 of that position, it frees up. Telltale sign that you have a bent camshaft. And then again, 180, tight, oh, and then loosey-goosey. Now, a bent camshaft, it's not the end of the world. It's not a death sentence. I've literally watched our cam grinder straighten out the camshaft on the bench with a hammer and a piece of wood and some centers. It's like a 20, 30-minute job. It's not a big deal. But I'm gonna have to have him straighten this thing out and do some inspection because it is used. And then we'll have to figure out what we want to do with these cam gears. Maybe that's the next guy's problem. But what is my problem is the other side, which has more issues. Again, saving money on the purchase price doesn't always mean that you're gonna save money at the end of the day. This is a pretty minor issue, but reputable sellers probably know how to ship things. Whoa, what a concept. So before I tighten down these cam caps, I'm gonna show you some of the worst damage on this head, and it's all shipping related, but it's not anything to do with the shipping company. It's just the guy that used to own this. He did a shit job packing everything. And also, please, can we stop taking freaking grinders to machine surfaces? If anything grinds my gears, it's got to be that, because it's not good. Nothing good comes of that. It also looks like someone took a piece of sandpaper and scuffed the underside of these caps, because that's not how they're supposed to look. We're gonna get real intimate with cam caps here in a hot minute, but check that out. See that nasty little gouge right there? That is from this cam being left loose on the cylinder head, and then it kept getting hammered up and down and then dropped on this little corner on the ground or inside of a warehouse or something to that effect. And since this thing was loosey-goosey on the head, took a big old chunk out of the cam cap. It also bent the crap out of the hollow dowel, caused all kinds of damage, and in fact, it even pushed the inside of this housing bore inward. And there are two more caps here that have damaged housing bores from the head being dropped. So not only is the housing bore damaged, the cam cap itself is also bent and twisted. So this cam cap, or this half of the cam cap, got twisted backwards in this direction, and then it's also got a big old bend right across the middle. It's not a big deal at the end of the day. All these things can be addressed. I promise you the machine shop guy isn't trying to screw you, but it's our responsibility to go to disclose all the major issues or the minor issues that we come across so that you understand when we say, hey, this has to be fixed, why we have to do it and how it is going to be done and why that costs time and money. Okay, so I need you to pay attention to this situation here. I'm gonna loosen up all these cam caps. Okay, so we're gonna go through this one at a time, and I'll start tightening them one at a time. And what you're gonna see is this cam is gonna become nice and locked up with every cam cap that I tighten. So I think this was one of the usable ones. Yep, that's usable. This cam is also bent, but not nearly as much. This was a usable one. Oh no, that was a bad one. Let's loosen that back up. Okay, this was usable. Okay, let's go to this very end one. And I'm not tightening this very tight, but it's got just a bit more tension. Tension's not good. This is a bearing surface. And now we're frozen. Oh God. Oh, these hurt. Everything is sharp. Okay. And now, that cam is frozen. This cam, or this cap, and the front cap have damaged housing boards, and they are damaged in such a way that the top of the cam cap, let's make this into a drinking game. Take a drink every time I say cam cap, because that's going to be a real theme in this frickin' episode. They got dropped on the top of the head. Housing boards got pushed in. I'm going to have to either scrape or bore these caps, just chasing the bore with a cutter, and I'll take down the high spot. My big problem with this is this was unnecessary and it could have been prevented. And if a little bit of care was put into packing this thing, it would have been fine. Someone who has experience selling engine parts probably wouldn't have done this. But whatever. I do want to show you an observation I made that's probably going to demonstrate how bad this housing bore is. It's a little sketch. It looks sketch, I promise you. Now, I had this whole grand idea of setting up my fancy electronic torque wrench and showing you how much braking torque it was required to get this cam to spin, but it's not this torque wrench. It's a little bit large to be able to record that data, but I did make an observation, and I can confidently hang my $600 torque wrench off of the front of that camshaft. That should be able to spin freely. That's a problem. I don't like that. You're not supposed to drop these, but it ain't going nowhere. That's pretty solid. So that's an issue. Please, careful who you buy from. We'll talk about this in a second, but the situation just keeps getting more dire. So this is a Porsche 911 cylinder head that's been highly modified according to the original builder or the original seller. And when you're buying used parts, it's not always real clear on how high or low the quality of the work is. This is not ported. It's supposed to be, but it's not. All they did was come in when they were doing the valve job. They came in with a cutter and just opened up the throat or the inside of the valve seat and then just ran a cutter straight down and did nothing else. No other shaping. And another thing that was done was they machined a receiver groove on the head sealing surface. These things don't have head gaskets. They just go metal on metal. And when you've got a little boosty boy hanging off of your really expensive Porsche engine, it gets a little cylinder pressure-y, and you'll tend to lift a cylinder head off, or you might have a sealing issue. So an old school thing that people do was they would cut a groove in the head, they would cut a groove in the cylinder, and that ring would engage in both the head and the cylinder, creating another path of resistance for the exhaust or for the combustion gases. This groove has to be done in a very, very precise manner. There's not very much leeway in how wide, how small, and how deep that groove can be. These grooves were cut crooked, engine got put together, lo and behold, everything leaked. The prospect of repairing this and starting over is not a cheap nor fast endeavor. So this will come up in a future video. I'm waiting on parts. Also, shipping. Things get damaged in shipping. It's a real trend. It's just a fin, but it's a broken fin. Me no likey. And we're here to talk about the star of the hour. This is a Ford GT500 or a Ford GT cylinder head. So this would be a Ford modular supercar cylinder head. These are discontinued. You can't buy them anymore, and there's not that many floating around in the used market. This gentleman got a very good deal off of eBay some years back for one reason and one reason only. We're missing one cam cap per cylinder head. That's a problem. If you don't know, these are married to the hole that they were bored with, or married to the head that they were bored for. So you can't just go and mix and match cam caps from head to head. You can't steal one from another. You can't go and, it's not easy to address a missing or damaged cap. We're going to do that today, and I'll show you one of the few ways that you can do it. And trust me, there are not that many ways, and it's very time consuming and very complicated. Oh, and also, you can't buy individual cam caps in the aftermarket. You can buy billet sets. There's one company that sells billet cam caps, but you have to buy a set. And replacing a whole set of caps, that's also an endeavor. Lucky us though, cam spins. Woo. So this is a factory cam cap, okay? Unmodified. It has dowels that are normally installed in it, but I pulled them out. The reason I did that was because I had to make fixtures that use some data and some measurements off of these cam caps. And you'll even see that I machined the side of the caps to work with my fixture. The next thing I did was I bought a big old chunk of aluminum. And the aluminum's not that expensive, but making it into something of value, that's where it gets a little sketchy. That led me to this. That, my boys, is almost a replacement billet cap that I had to make. And oh man, was that a little bit complicated. And it's not an impossible task. I have a friend of mine who does this on a regular basis. And there is a way where you can make and install a cam cap without having to line bore the head. Line boring is a process where you pick up on a center line on the cylinder head, and I guess this would also apply to engine blocks. It's a process where you pick up on a center line on the cylinder head, so that would be whatever the center of this cam bore, of this cam tunnel is. Then you'd set up a precision bar with a cutter on the inside of it, and then it runs across the length of that center line. So that requires fixturing. You'd have plates or some kind of arm that supports the boring bar, and then you'd also have to have enough travel length. It's kind of a complicated bit. There are dedicated machines for doing this job. Now, I don't have one of those machines, and I don't have the fixturing to do that, so how else would you make a cam cap? Now, option 2 would be to machine an individual cam cap for this bore. And the way you would do that is you would determine what the cam bore center line was for that individual location. So one of those things that you would do is you would take a measurement from this cam saddle here, or this flat surface, and you'd record what the half of this cam bore was. So this is 27 millimeters, or 1 inch, 63 thousandths, okay? So how much of that 1 inch, 63 thousandths, or 27 millimeters is actually inside of the cylinder head? So you take and set up your tool, and what I'm seeing is about 532, 533, okay? If you're lucky, there's another way you can do this, and the way I did this was I actually was able to take a neighboring cam cap and put it into the position that I had a missing cap on, and I found that my vertical oil clearance, as well as my clearance side to side, was pretty damn close, and the cam was able to spin freely. So what I did was I set up a fixture that worked off of this cam cap, and I replicated the neighboring cam cap exactly. And what that means is that there's a couple tricks that I can also utilize that will help me get this head into usable condition again, but that also means that I can use that neighboring cam cap as a template for my new one. Now look, I'm a pretty good machinist, but I've never done this before. I have been around a lot of people who know and have done this in front of me, and I was lucky enough to be able to ask a friend of mine how he does it. But I did spend the night before thinking about how I would do it, and I called him and asked some questions. And basically, the ideas I had in my head, which were just logic, were right on the money. So what I did was I took the dimensions off of the original cap and roughed in a piece of 6061 aluminum. So minus a few little alterations that I made, these caps are basically identical in every single way. And we all started off, and I started off with this simple piece of 1" by 2" 6061 aluminum. But I had to cut up this piece. Okay, I had to buy a 12" piece of stock. And then I had to profile every single side, get everything all squared up. I didn't do a perfect job, which I was able to address later after I scrapped one of my original cam caps and had to start over from scratch. And maybe I'll show you, it's a little embarrassing what that ended up looking like, but we're not all perfect, right? Unless you're me. I set the thickness of my cap, or the width of the cap. I set this width to a very, very precise measurement, and I'll show you the reason for that here in a second. I've got the bolt hole shoulder heights very much exact as well, and even got the valve cover hold downs included. The only change I made was just, and this was simply for simplicity, was when I cut these shoulders, I didn't come over front to back on my y-axis. I didn't square this off. And I thought that would just make the cam cap look pretty cool, but you know, it also served the purpose of it saved me a little time. And in reality, it might make it a little stronger. I could have made this radius a little bit larger. This is only a 40 thousandths radius, but it's fine. The only reason this nub exists is to hold down the valve cover. One of the things I will change is, instead of using the dowels to locate exactly in the cylinder head, I've got 4 thousandths of clearance built into these dowel holes, and the dowels will move from the inside of the cam cap like this. Okay, see that? They're going to move from the cap to inside of the head. Okay, so I'll Loctite them inside of the head. And what that's going to allow is for this cam cap to float around just a little bit, so that I can have a little leeway and just a little bit larger of a tolerance in regard to where I place this cam tunnel. When the engine gets assembled and you've got camshafts that are under spring tension and all that, things tend to self-center. Ford is actually really notorious for building engines that don't have alignment dowels or any manner of alignment when you pre-check or assemble them on the bench. So like a Ford 6.7 liter diesel, the whole cam or the whole crankshaft bed plate, it doesn't have any location on it at all. There are no dowels. It makes it really complicated for checking housing bores when you're doing when you're trying to line hone those things. They're designed to use the crank bearings and just an oil film to help self-align things. And then every single Ford Duratec out there, I think this is a Mazda thing also, every single Ford Duratec engine has cam caps that are also unlocated by anything other than the camshaft and an oil film. So as far as we're concerned, all that I need to worry about is getting the width of the bore set to the correct width, which I'm able to do that on the bench, because that's just a diameter that I've got to reach. And then I've got to make sure that I've got enough vertical oil clearance, which is going to be determined by the height from this flat to the top of the bore on the cam cap that I'm copying. And then beyond that, I can set up some gauges and measure what the housing bore is, and I could even then measure the camshaft, which I've already done, and make sure I've got enough oil clearance, which in my mind, probably about 2 to 3 thousandths of oil clearance would be right in line with what this thing should have. So this is what I've been up to the past couple days. Again, I haven't done this before, so I took my sweet ass time trying to figure out how to do it. But this thing's finished to size, and it was very, very successful. I dropped the cam cap I was copying onto this fixture here, which has a register just like a block would on either side, and it's got a thousandth of press fit. So this cam cap, I can pull it out of the fixture and put it back in, and it will repeat its location. So that was just a little feature I didn't end up using, but on the other head, I may end up using. But I don't know. If I pull this thing out, I might be able to set it onto that head, which is the mate, put it in place, and let you know or show you whether or not that cam spins. And I think it should, considering that I got it pretty damn tits. Now here's my sizing. So I've got to hit 25 or 27 millimeters to 27.025 millimeters, or in American Freedom English, 1 inch 63 thousandths to 1 inch 64 thousandths on my final bore size. And I set this one at 1 inch 64 thousandths on the bore size. And the finish is pretty acceptable. I'm happy with that. There's a bit of a burr that I'll have to clean up, but whatever, I'm cool with it. I do need to spend some time investing in better boring bar tooling because I only had these cheap high-speed steel boring bars that I don't really fit inside of my fancy Criterion head very well, but all's good. It's fine. And that is quite sexy. So I'll get this pulled off and we'll just drop this onto the head here, just make sure that cam spins, and then we'll drop this unfinished cam cap into the fixture and we'll get this finished out. Okay. Look at that. Nice. Why is that so gummy? Weird. Oh well, that's what the grinder's for. Finish is pretty decent. Little bit of chatter, but that's because I have this shitty boring bar, so whatever. So I'll chamfer all these edges and get it put together. All right. Safety squints engaged. That'll work. I like a nice large chamfer on these corners. Nice and thick like that. And then I'll be a little more precise on these edges. Nice tight chamfer. This tight chamfer there. That looks pretty good. Won't cut yourself on that. Awesome. That's interesting. It's kind of hard to eyeball, but you can see that the tunnel is shifted from one side to the other. So that's one of those things, you can't just put this tunnel right on center. You've got to copy what's already in the cylinder head. But that finish is pretty good. It's a little chattery, but for the purpose of a cam bearing, it's going to work out great because theoretically that camshaft should never touch this. And just for good measure, I can buff this off with the Scotch Brite. Knock off the high spots in that bore, and it also polishes things up just a little. There we go. That looks pretty good. Let's see how it fits in the head. I haven't put this on the head yet, so hopefully my theory works out. That is pretty sexy though. Nice. This was the out of the original set that I made, I ended up scrapping. This was the only salvageable part out of that first set. My big mistake was I came in and used my fly cutter or my face mill to put chamfers on all these edges. And that was all fine and dandy. It was a good thought. Except I tried to chamfer this shoulder after I cut the bolt hole height, or after I cut this shoulder to set the bolt hole height. Um, and I thought I'd also be chamfering this edge, except in order to chamfer that edge, the way I thought it would work, this would have to be cut at an angle just like that. So I ended up putting this ugly little feature into here, and it looked like crap. And then in denial of scrapping this really complicated part, at least complicated for that day, I took it to the belt sander, which is out right now. Had a Scotch-Brite pad on, and I tried radiusing all the corners, and then I realized, that's looking like absolute garbage. And instead of stopping, I kept at it thinking, oh yeah, it'll get better. No, it didn't. So back to the scrap bin you go. And try not to get lost in the sauce with the YouTube fanciness, because everybody makes mistakes. You only get to see the good stuff on YouTube. Okay. So you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but it wiggles a little bit left to right. Front to back location will get a lot better once I have dowels in these holes. Actually, I can put dowels in there now. Okay. It's kind of a pain in the butt with the cam lobes in the way. They're a little loose in there. I think some Loctite would help that situation, but that's okay. Works good for Mockup. Did I cut those shoulders deep enough? Hope I did. Okay. Get a little oil in there, actually. Some WD-40 would work. There we go. Whoa. Okay. And that still spins. I felt it get a little tense. Might have been in my head, but I'd say that's a success. So let's try this without the dowels. I just did it with the dowels in place, and it was fine, but that cam cap definitely wants to have them installed. Okay, got that put in, got that put in. Perfect. Oops, that's backwards. Okay. Still spins. That's our replacement cap. Fit a lot better with the dowels, but when I get the new ones, when the new ones show up from Ford, I'll be able to fix this front to back clearance. But left to right, it's pretty good. It's exactly what I was going for. The cam does spin. Spins quite well. Nice. I think we can live with that. One of those things, it's not a perfect world. if I did go to measure this bore and I found that my vertical clearance was too loose, one of the solutions, instead of scrapping the part, is I'd be able to cut material off of this parting line and I'd shrink the housing bore. And that would add some ovality at the parting line, or it would change the shape of this and would be a little ovaled. It wouldn't be the perfect circle that you would love to see, but again, it's a repair. So even if that parting line ended up being a little bit wide, that vertical clearance would get back into a spec, or whatever the spec needed to be, and that increase in width at the parting line, I mean, in reality, it's good for it anyways, because it prevents the edges from becoming a wiper. And if I did find that the bore at the parting line ended up being too small, I could just put it back into the fixture and start over. So there is quite a bit of room here for second chances. So it's fine. But I would say that's a success, and I'll take it. Nice. That looks pretty good. So I've got everything torqued up. What I wasn't going to do was I wasn't going to show this cam cap dropped onto this head with dowels, but I just robbed the dowels out of this cap. I'm waiting on new ones to show up from Ford. I'm going to just Loctite them into here because these are supposed to be a slip fit, at least into the head. Let's see. That's the closest tapping tool I have in sight. Okay. That one just dropped right in. Perfect. And I forgot to mark these for front and back, but that's the back. That should go together. Oh, there we go. Backwards. But those dowels, they helped a lot with the clearance front to back, and then I still have a little bit of clearance left to right, but that's a pretty tight fit. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. Cam cap drops on. It's funny, you can see that misalignment in the bore in regard to the bolt holes or the dowel holes. When I try to put this cap on backwards, it locks the cam up, but when I flip it 180, everything's fine and dandy. So I'll have to make sure I mark that very clearly so nobody screws that up, because I clearly screwed that up. But it's looking pretty hopeful since these caps do drop on. I guess it's a good time to get these washers out of here and install this the way they're supposed to be installed. Get a little lube under that bolt. Whoops. Little lube? A lot of lube. Okay. Nice. Felt a little weird when I started tightening that, but once it was tight, the cam loosened up again. So the cam bolts are distorting the housing bore. I'll go and give those a tighten with a ratchet. Torque on these isn't very high. It's like 120 inch-pounds or something to that effect. It's not much. Impact goes a long way. A careful impacting goes a long way. Okay, everything's tight, and that cam spins nice and free. And I'm not done yet. I'm not going to show it on camera, but the last thing I'll have to do is I'll get this camshaft out of here and get some measurements of the housing bore. I know it's going to come out to 27 millimeters since that's just how the math worked out when I cut it on the mill. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take a measurement off of the cam journal and then figure out what my bore oil clearance is. And then from there, it's pretty easy to make an adjustment. I can, if it's a little bit too loose, I can take some material off of this parting line. And if I take material off of that parting line and it affects the housing bore in some negative manner, then I'll just take note of what changed and what needs to happen, and then I'll put the cap back into the fixture and make the adjustments accordingly. But based on the fact that that cam is spinning pretty well, I'm quite happy with that. And then before I forget, we're hand stamped with a number 8, just to match that original engraving that somebody put onto the head. When these things got brought to me, all these cam caps got mixed up from head to head, and they were in no particular order. So then I had to spend an hour deburring everything, figuring out which location they actually belong to, and then it was again a waste of time. It was a careless thing. I have no idea why there was one missing cap. I can only assume that someone either lost the cap or they robbed it for another head. And then thought, oh yeah, I'll be such a great lad, we'll throw it on eBay. Sucker's born every day. Oh, and before I forget, please, silicone. It doesn't belong on fucking everything. Captain Permatex over here had a field day. Dude. I mean, I'm pretty sure these were GT 500 heads, but I mean, if this came off a Ford GT, I would be fucking livid. Dude. Amazing. Next guy glue. That's great. So I did some preliminary measurements on the next cylinder head. I took that cap we just made, set it up in the location we're repairing, and then I measured the vertical diameter as well as the diameter horizontally at the parting line. What I did determine was from basically 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock is the party or the diameter shrunk by 1,000th. So what that means is I need to shift this bore to the left by 1,000th, and then that will correct for that center line. But my vertical center line is exactly the same, so I'm actually going to be good on my setup. All I'm going to have to do is shift the table over 1,000th, and I'll be good to go with the exact setup that I have now. So that's good news. That being said, the cam does spin just fine with the cap we just made, so it's not that far off, and I'm just getting a little nitpicky. So if I just make sure that my housing bore ends up being the right diameter, and then I shift the center line to the left just a little bit, or I guess to the center of the engine a little bit, everything will be fine and dandy. This thing will be able to run again. So I lucked out. The cap I just made worked on the other head. If that wasn't the case, then I'd either have to steal a dimension off of an existing cam cap, or I could honestly just take the other rough cap and start roughly machining a counterbore, or start roughly machining the cam bore. And then you take a parallel and a deck bridge or something to this effect, and then you'd start taking measurements of your cam center line. You take that number, so here that number is 536, where is it? Nope, 537. Yep, 537, okay? So I'd take that number, get the same measurement on the head side, and then the sum of those two numbers should equal to what my housing bore needs to be. So that number that I measure on the cylinder head, that would be exactly related to the number that I have to cut into the cam cap. So I'll just use a nice square number. So say the measurement I take off of the head is 600, and I know the housing bore is 1 inch, that tells me that I'll have to cut the bore, or the bore half in the cam cap, to about 400. the best thing you could do is sneak up on that number and incrementally move your cutter further up this cap and increase that center line number and just keep going back and forth and checking and rechecking until you've got the correct bore geometry. And then if I wanted to get this cam cap to fit tighter with these dowels, I would then take measurements at other locations than just 12 and 6 o'clock, and then I would be able to shift the bore around at the same time and get that bore back into the same location. It's very time intensive, but if you have to repair one location, then that's a very practical way of saving a cylinder head. If this was just a run-of-the-mill Honda, I probably wouldn't do that. But this is pretty common practice with a lot of the European engines, like even especially the Italians, because of the way they oil the camshafts and their cam phasers and their variable timing and whatnot. On Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and Maseratis, very commonly the cam caps need to be replaced because they'll get damaged due to oiling issues. And of course, this is the internet. If I don't show a measurement, I'll get a bunch of crap in the comments. That's the measurement that I got at 12 and 7, or at 2 and 7 o'clock at the parting line. So I've got a 1 inch 63, which is on size. And then at 12 and 6 o'clock, I measured 1 inch 64. So that'll tell me that I've got to make adjustments accordingly when I make this new cap, and then I'll be able to correct for that sizing. And then again, because the internet freaks out if they don't see it, there's my micrometer measurement, which is 1 inch 63 and 2 10,000ths. So just be careful, take your time, sneak up on it. It's very time consuming, but you can have a pretty good result if you're very careful and systematic about how you approach this. I keep lying to you guys. I said I wasn't going to do this in this video or talk about it, but I just had to check. So I took apart the first head, measured my oil clearance on the first cap that we made, and it turned out I was 1,000th too loose. That would have been fine in reality, but I wanted to bring it back to what it was. So I sanded on my granite table the bottom of that cap, and I shrunk it 1,000th. Okay. You'll see that right there. Brought it back into the fixture, bolted the cap up, and then just lightly touched up the housing bore. So what happens when you take away material from the parting line, you'll change the shape of the originally round bore, and then it becomes more oval shaped. And if it's on size to begin with and you shrink that bore, now you're gonna have some screwed up bore geometry. So it'll be an oval, and it'll be tight at the parting line, which is here and here. So that means that you're gonna have to correct for that, and that's what I did. Now that now that I've corrected for that and I put it back together, everything is back on size exactly the way it needed to be. So that was just one thing that I had to check, and I just decided to do it while I was filming the video. But everything's really happy in the cam. Though I'm 1,000th less on oil clearance, still spins great. Awesome. So the first issue I have to address is the boring bar won't plunge through this big blocky mess. I need to have essentially a pilot hole. So I'll switch tools, put a 2-fluted carbide end mill into the spindle, and then I'll be able to plunge straight down and create that pilot hole. Then I can switch back to the boring bar and we can start setting up the new housing bore. Almost got in trouble. Last time I did this, I needed to hang the end mill out a little more. So I'm glad I remembered that. Seem to remember only running that down with an impact. Let's make sure that's nice and tight. Okay. This is still an interrupted cut. It's going to sound very sketchy. Yeah, that's a little sketchy. Sounds worse than it actually is. Okay, so we broke it through. Now we can switch to the boring bar. Okay, so we made it through. Perfect. Now let's go another 100 thousandths. Okay. Just feeding this by hand. When I get to the fine adjustments and the fine cuts, I'll be using the power feed on my quill. And I gotta say, I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to watch all these videos. They take a considerable amount of effort for me to make. Like for example, if it takes me 4 hours to do a job, it takes me 12 if I'm filming it. Lately, I've been trying to make them a little more visually appealing. It's really hard. This is just a 2-car garage, and this is my hobby, and I do have a life outside of this, and it's just making the time to put the videos out is, you know, it's a commitment. So thank you guys for being so dedicated to the channel and being very supportive of what I'm doing. It has improved so much over the past year and a half, and it's going to keep on improving because I really do get a kick out of putting these videos out. I don't know if you guys can see this, but see that little Sharpie mark right below the 20? I just put that there to remind me that that's going to be my final diameter. So I've got 18 thousandths to go. One of the things that we're going to run into is I don't have coolant set up on this mill. So I'm going to have to either balance WD-40 and maybe some brake clean, which is full of a type of alcohol, to get the final finish. So what might happen is this thing might get into a situation where it's going to chatter the whole way up and down, and I'll have to figure out how to resolve that chatter. So if I'm careful and I set my diameters up correctly, that won't happen, but you might see me panic and freak out a little bit because that happened on the last cap. Thankfully, I was able to resolve it, but it should go okay. I should get coolant set up on this mill because it will, it is half set up to run coolant. So we'll see. Limited equipment, but lots of expertise here. I am willing to wing it. Now, if you notice on the right side, you're going to see that burr starting to go away. Once we approach final size, the burr is going to go away completely. So I'm keeping an eye on that because that's going to signify that I'm getting pretty damn close. Okay. I shouldn't have to hold this, but I've got to make an adjustment. Something got loose or came out of adjustment last year. I haven't gotten around to it. One day. I'm not using WD-40 because it, with this type of cutter, or with high-speed steel, I think it's just making it act like a lubricant and then it stops cutting. So alcohol, isopropyl alcohol or brake clean tends to work really well. The problem with the brake clean is it gets you kind of stoned. So proper ventilation is probably helpful, but I don't have that. And of course, I've run out of brake clean. So you can see it works pretty well as a lubricant. So it's really not a good lubricant. What it's doing is it's keeping the corner of that cutter clean, and it's just helping to keep things nice and cool. And that's it. So we're going to do the last pass now. I'm just going to let that cutter rub across the surface. It should polish things up and just get rid of the some of the lines left over from that 3/1000ths pass. It looks like we're done. Okay, so I'm going to stop the quill. Turn the machine off. Let it come up on its own, rubbing on the fixture. And that looks pretty damn good. Okay. Put my quill handle back on. Zip this cap off and get it deburred. Two. Okay. That's what it looks like. There's a little bit of a burr here. 6061 is a little gummy. I'll make sure to mark which side was up this time. Just a little Sharpie mark for now will suffice. So let's go take this to the grinder and get rid of these burrs. Look at that finish. It's not bad. I have a feeling we're going to have to go back in the machine. Nice and fat chamfers. All right, I'm gonna try to show you what I did here. There is a slight sizing issue at the parting line, but I'm good on the vertical, so there is one way I can fix that. I'm gonna have to be very careful about how I'm gonna do that. There is oil clearance at the parting line though, so it's debatable whether or not I should go back into the machine and screw around with it. So I'll measure the cam and figure out how much clearance there is at the parting line. If there's about 2 thousandths, I'm good. Because I'm at 1 inch 63 on the vertical, which is the most important. At the parting line, I'm tight. I'm at 1 inch 62 and a half. Half a thousandth isn't really a big deal. We're splitting hairs here. But I found this 1 inch wrist pin sitting around, and I was able to snug this cap down and kind of just wiggle it around in the bore and shift this cap around and get it lined up. So part of my issue was just because the cap is floating and it's hard to get a size when you can't repeat the placement of the cap. Okay. So there's one. This should be 1 inch 62. 1 inch 62 and a half, 62.3. Okay. Mike shows the same thing. The caliper is easier to show you. A lot of you guys don't know how to read a micrometer. Okay. That feels good. One inch 63, probably because I'm holding the end of this, but 1 inch 62, 1 inch 63. I'm right there at the limit, so debatable if I should be going back in here. One inch 61. Okay. 9/10, basically. That would be approximately 1.5 thousandths of clearance. If you don't squeeze the calipers, it'll actually give you the right measurement. I'm going to go back in the machine. I'm just going to make a small adjustment. Okay, so pay attention. This is going to go fast. I'm just going to extend my boring bar out 1/1000th, and then I'm going to move the table over 1/1000th, and I'm just going to sneak up on this and clean up just the sides of the cap. I just scratched the inside of that bore. You can see that line running down the middle. Okay, I'm going to touch there, but if I move over, I'm not going to touch there. Same thing with the top of the bore. I am just going to slowly move the table inward until I'm satisfied with how that bore looks. And if this goes all wrong, it's okay, because I can clip the bottom of that cap. But I just want this wider at the parting line. And that's what we're doing. The shape's gonna be a little weird, but don't worry about that. Not what we're concerned about. Okay. Boring bar backwards. I'm going to move the table over 1/1000. And I'm going to do this again until I've reached about 1 o'clock. Okay? This might go, this might not work in my favor. Okay, so I moved over 1/1000. Let's see if that does what I think it will. And it is very subtle. And I'm going to do it one more time. And that will be problem solved. And again, all that time that I put into setting up this fixture so that this cap can come in and out and repeat its position paid off, because I ended up using that feature. Okay. It's just barely kissing right at the top, but not really. So that half a thou was the right move. Cool. That actually worked out quite well. Surprising. Not expecting that. All right, back on the bench. Oh, I filmed that whole ending of the video and didn't have the mic turned on, so we're gonna do this again. That unhealthy amount of perseverance that I have, it's just endless. It's amazing. But look at that. Again, I mean, we knew this from the beginning. The cam spun. I don't know why that was a secret, why I made that out to be a secret. There are more issues with these end cam caps than there are with the cap that we made, because this thing gets literally tighter when I snug these two down. I think there's burrs or something going on the inside that I'm going to have to clean up. But whatever. This cam spin's awesome. I would say that was a successful repair. Come on. Come loose. Look at that. Makes a full revolution when I give that thing a swing. And that cam cap looks awesome. I'm very happy with that. So I'll pull this cam off, get this cap realigned, and we'll remeasure this, and we'll call that the end. Snap gauges are a little finicky. But there we go. We got first one, 1" 63. We'll go to the next position. Come on. One" 63. Okay, so we've solved our issue with the parting line. And then let's get our vertical bore diameter. There we go, 1" 63. And I would say that's a video. Look at that. That's amazing. I've never done that before. That was a lot of fun. I have a headache. I need to go lay down. So thank you guys. I don't know how long this video is going to be or when I'm going to put it out. But if it's the weekend, enjoy your weekend. But if it's in the middle of the week, I hope you have a good week. So this is Josh at Engine Rehab. I appreciate you staying to the end. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you want to see. Let me know what you think. You know, if you've done this before, give me some suggestions, but this was pretty cool. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time. And also, please, if you're not subscribed, hit subscribe. I want to hit 100K by the end of the year. We're putting in a lot of effort here. It's only going to keep getting better. Only up from here. Appreciate it.